You are listening to the Kelly Confidential podcast with Kelly Wilkes. This is episode 20. Welcome to the Kelly Confidential Show, where we talk negotiation essentials and those crucial conversations empowering extraordinary women. Real women, real issues. Let's jump in. Hey there, friends. Kelly here. How's your week going so far? And how was your weekend? My weeks seem to be hectic these days. I'm doing some work in London at the moment, which means my normal admin spills over to the evenings and weekends. So I'm trying to get into a new routine to fit it all in. And we're well into October now, so I've been running around trying to get some last summer chores sorted and closing off some plans for rebranding. Yep, going for a brand new look for my business and website. And yeah, exciting. Marking up plans for my next training program, Negotiation Essentials for Women. So yeah, more on that in the next few weeks as well. And so back to London. I'm in my clients' offices a couple days a week, but my commute journey, wowzer, nearly 2 hours door to door, one way. And if you've never been a commuter in London, it is an experience like no other, not for the faint-hearted. It can make for a long and really grueling day. But the upside is that because I'm marooned, I can spend the time reading. And yeah, I can't really complain about the morning train. At least I get a seat. Quite a few people have to stand in the aisles for the majority of the duration, which, I feel for them. But yeah, so the upside, I have a chance to catch up on some reading, and I've got a few books lined up that I'm excited about. One is called Mother of Invention by Catherine Marcal, which charts over the centuries numerous inventions by women which were sidelined or flat out stolen by male-dominated businesses. And it analyzes the effects of those lost opportunities. It's really fascinating. Really am enjoying it so far. So I'll let you know soon what I think about the rest of it, but check it out if you're looking for something out there at the moment. And on the topic of lost opportunities, we're going to talk about workplace bullying today. What comes to mind when you think of a bully? What's your first thought, I wonder? This is a topic that comes up with most of my clients. In fact, it's one of the questions I'm asked the most when I'm leading training programs, how to deal with a bully or an aggressive negotiator. And so what comes to your mind when you think of a bully? Maybe it's a movie or a TV character, and maybe it's a real person. I've had my fair share of dealing with bullies. But when I think of the archetype for this subject, my mind goes quickly to a very specific television character. Millennials may not remember this person, but in terms of television history, few characters have left as indelible a mark as Archie Bunker, the outrageously un-PC and loud-mouthed patriarch of the Bunker family in the sitcom All in the Family. Played by Carol O'Connor, Archie Bunker was the focal point of what was truly a groundbreaking show, one that was expected to fail, actually, but which proved itself as the outlier of the early 70s and aired an incredible 9 seasons from 1971 to the end of the decade. The show was a revolutionary departure from the sanitized sitcoms that preceded it, as it sought to tackle the pressing social issues of racism, sexism, and bigotry head-on. And it was this daring and provocative approach coupled with truly unforgettable characters that made it a cultural phenomenon. The brutish, incomparable character of Archie Bunker represented a segment of American society that, at the time, was unapologetically bigoted, conservative, and set in its ways. He was a blue-collar worker living in Queens, New York, and his unfiltered, politically incorrect rants often exposed the prejudices of his generation. Despite this, when All in the Family premiered in 1971, it instantly struck a chord with audiences, bringing viewers back week after week. The show's portrayal of real and complex social issues was both its greatest strength and quite a source of controversy. The boundary-pushing themes, the performances of the cast, particularly Carol O'Connor, were critical to the show's success. O'Connor's portrayal of Archie Bunker was humorous, as well as being eye-wateringly disconcerting. He skillfully brought depth to his bullying character, humanizing him despite his many, many flaws, making audiences reflect on perhaps their own failures and flaws, and even empathizing with him on occasion. So powerful were the storylines that the series dominated the ratings throughout its 9-year run, regularly topping the charts and earning numerous accolades. Carol O'Connor and Jean Stapleton, who played Archie's wife Edith, together won 7 Emmy Awards between them. The show itself was awarded 4 consecutive Emmys for Outstanding Comedy during its run. So revered was this really flawed family that Archie's beloved chair was on display at one point at the Smithsonian National Museum of American History. In 2021, Time magazine ran a 50th anniversary special edition honoring the sitcom. Author Daniel Levy wrote, "While foul-mouthed, Archie was weakly put in his place and shown to be wrong, mostly at the hands of his loyal wife, Edith, who, as Levy wrote, challenged Archie to face some of his fears, as behind Edith's ditzy facade lie a bottomless well of tolerance and an innate and noble sense of fairness." It was the powerful and sometimes arresting performances between Jean Stapleton and Carol O'Connor that humanized the man, and as Levy wrote, slowly revealed a wounded soul who struggled with his fears and was one whole audiences could hate, pity, and maybe even like, all at the same time. And so one of the questions I have about this anti-hero is, was Archie Bunker actually a bully? What do you think? To be fair, the question isn't that simple, and my more pressing question is how to deal with a bully. Can you deal with a bully? Can you negotiate with one? Okay, so back up. Let's answer the first question. Was Archie a bully? My answer? Yes, I think we can safely say that Archie Bunker was and can still be considered a bully in many instances, especially after 50 years of progressive social movements. His character in the sitcom often displayed aggressive and domineering behavior towards those around him, especially when they disagreed with his views or challenged his often narrow beliefs. His prejudiced and bigoted attitudes were evident in his interactions and in the humiliating name-calling with his son-in-law, Mike Stivic, as well as with people of different races, ethnicities, and backgrounds. But what we also know is that Archie's bullying behavior was often a result of his fear of change and his resistance to progress and social evolution. His language and actions were frequently offensive, and he used derogatory terms and slurs to belittle those he disagreed with. Sound familiar? This is a bully in action. If you've experienced bullying at home or in the workplace, it's likely this will resonate with you. Many have said that All in the Family was a product of its time, and the portrayal of Archie Bunker's behavior reflected the societal norms and attitudes prevalent during the 1970s. Some of that is true, sure. I mean, if you Google some old shows, it makes you wince to watch some of the relationship dynamics, especially Archie's treatment of his long-suffering wife, Edith, and with counterpart George Jefferson, played by Sherman Hemsley, who would later headline his own breakout show about a wealthy African-American family and what became the Jeffersons. So when I first structured this podcast, I wanted to give him a human face. I wanted to provide a face to my bully archetype. Archie Bunker made it easy. His foul-mouthed, wide-eyed bigotry and offensive behavior was overt, meaning you could see it, touch it, feel it. You knew what you were dealing with. Whole communities related to him, and he was humanized because we came to learn and to expect that by the end of the show, he would be proven wrong. He would have learned a lesson about whatever social blunder or biased objection he'd taken up, and it was redemptive to the point where he became almost likable. And importantly, it was 100% on display with no smoke and mirrors. We knew what we were getting with Archie Bunker. Now, fast forward those 50 years, and while society has progressed tenfold in a number of subjects frequently challenged on the show, the modern bully is unfortunately alive and kicking and arguably harder to deal with these days. Dressed in fine threads, sporting expensive watches and luxury cars, society seems to have accepted that a bully is more tolerable when running an empire dressed in exquisite suits. And if you're Logan Roy from the blockbuster show Succession, you go nowhere unless dressed in an $8,500 suit. And add more flashy cars, helicopters, private jets, penthouse parties, and jaw-dropping corporate takeovers, and you have the Roy family in all its glory. Fascinating and all the more obsession-worthy, Logan Roy, the fictional family's calculating and ruthless leader, is routinely compared to Rupert Murdoch, the real-life patriarch of the Murdoch Empire. Glamorous, elegant even, with insane wealth and influence, and far more difficult to package as a brutish bully. And this, my friends, is why I have used Archie Bunker and Logan Roy as the bookends for today's episode, because at the apex of these two vastly different personalities lies an undisputed bully. And in the 50 years since we first met Archie Bunker, bullying hasn't really receded, as I've said. In fact, it's operating in fairly buoyant numbers in many places, as I'll soon share with you. And so here we are at our main topic, one so pertinent to so many, which is, can we negotiate with a bully? Now, notice I didn't say, should we negotiate with a bully? Because I know my answer is yes. And no doubt this will send hairs raising, I'm sure. And because this is such a meaty subject, I'm covering this in a two-part episode. Today's episode examines how the law views a bully, how it affects an organization, and why the bully behaves as they do. And in the follow-up episode, I'm breaking down how to handle yourself when facing a negotiation with a bully. So look out for that next episode, which will be released in the next week. Now, for purposes of this first part, I'm specifically looking at bullying behavior. I'm not lumping physical or emotional abuse in this topic. And I expressly object to and have advised against negotiating with anyone who is physically or emotionally threatening. So I'm just asking that you don't paint what I'm covering in this episode with that same brush, because they're two different topics. So just stick it out, stay with me. And of course, it would be easier to tie it up nicely and simply to say all bullies are brutes, and these folks are in the same class with emotionally and physically violent types, and we should not engage. It would be easy to say we should avoid them at all costs. But that's just not true, and I'm not here to do easy, because the reality is that this isn't clean and tidy. It is messy, and it's important that we talk about it. I'm going to keep it narrow, and so we're going to stay on topic with bullies for today, especially because of the pervasive nature of bullying in the workplace. This is an important topic for just so many people, women especially, who may feel they have no option and nowhere to go when dealing with a bully. And I'm here to tell you that you have more power and control than you think. Starting with a key belief of mine that it's not as simple as saying one can never negotiate with a bully, that a bully can't change and we can't negotiate with them, and that they're this one-dimensional aggressor, etc., etc. In fact, I argue that that kind of view leads to bad advice, but probably not for the reasons you think. Stay with me. We're going to tackle this head on, and let's jump in. Okay, folks, so today we're talking about workplace bullying, and we're going to be building up over two episodes, this one and a second part, specifically with guidance on how to negotiate with a bully in a workplace environment. That's where we're heading. But before we do that, I want to make sure I'm doing right by you and the subject, so it's important that we spend a moment firstly to look at the landscape of bullying the how, and the why so that you're clear on what it is and what it isn't. I'll cover this in 3 parts. So number 1, how to recognize it. Number 2, how it's allowed to thrive in big business. So how big business actually enables bullying. And number 3, we'll look at the psychology of the bully. Okay, so let's tackle the superficial aspects of this first. My view, bullying is the weakest form of negotiation because force doesn't really rely on having much skill. It's brutish, primal, and there's not much strategy in that type of approach. That's the easy part, recognizing that. And recognizing that alone should put you in the right mindset. The hard part is recognizing that as a negotiator, which we all are, there is 0 chance of avoiding this in business or even with some family and community relationships. So what am I saying? I'm saying that negotiation is a form of conflict resolution, which extends to bullying behavior. And I'd hardly be any good at being a negotiator if I told all of you, you must not do this and that it's wholly unacceptable to negotiate with a bully. So I won't say that. I do, of course, say that you should cease any negotiations with anyone who is being physically or verbally abusive. This is particularly true in family mediations. It's just a no-go zone. But there are other forms of bullying, many in fact, and these require a different set of spectacles. And before we start peeling back those onion layers, let's look at what we mean by bullying and some workplace statistics. Let's start with the US. In an article by the Harvard Business Review with citations from the Workplace Bullying Institute, in their 2021 report, they shared that 79 million U.S. workers reported being affected by workplace bullying, meaning witnessing it or being subjected to it, with the staggering 65% of bullies being the bosses, managers, or supervisors of the affected party. That's huge, highlighting a concerning trend of abusive behavior from authority figures. The other harrowing number here is that nearly 70% of those bullied are vulnerable to being fired, or they simply quit because they feel they have no choice but to resign. And these stats appear to be on the rise. So it's important to mention also, I think in particular, there are no federal laws in place today to protect American workers universally, meaning state to state, against workplace bullying. But 31 states have signed up to the HWB law, which is their Healthy Workplace Bill, for local statewide enforcement in those 31 states. And this is a law that's there to assure workers of a certain standard for safe working, which really outlaws bullying behavior, bullying and harassment, which is a good segue to the fact that the U.S. does recognize harassment in the workplace as a form of discrimination that violates the Civil Rights Act, the Age Discrimination in Employment Act, and the American with Disabilities Act. For context, workplace harassment in the U.S. is defined as malicious, unwanted, repetitive, and abusive, arbitrary, unreasonable, or capricious behaviors by employers, agents, supervisors, or employees oblivious to the employer's legitimate business interests that create an intimidating, humiliating, hostile, or offensive work environment not suitable for a reasonable person to perform their duties or tasks in a normal manner. Phew, that's a mouthful. Now, it's important to note, if not really curious from a sociology perspective, that while there are no federal protections and only 2/3 of states, as I mentioned, offer local protections against adult bullying, all 50 states have anti-bullying laws in place for children, and they also benefit from protections in Title IX of the Federal Civil Rights Law that prohibits discrimination on the basis of sex, including sexual harassment, in schools. This protects male and female students and employees in any educational entity that receives federal funds. Just thought that was important to share in case you didn't know that and you need help. I've included the links to all of these resources, including the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, in my show notes if you need any of this information, again, if you need any help. Now let's take a look at the UK. You may be surprised to know although not dissimilar to my last example, that while the UK government defines and recognizes workplace bullying and harassment and discrimination, unlike the latter two, bullying specifically is not against the law in the UK. So they've followed their US cousins on this particular law. But if you're being harassed, and there is a very fine line, right? You have legal grounds to respond to that. It's harassment when the malicious behavior is related to any of the following personal factors: age, your gender, disability, any gender reassignment, marriage or civil partnerships, pregnancy, maternity, race, religion, belief, or sexual orientation. If any of those factors exist, then you may have a case. So reading between the lines, the use of the word harassment when reporting incidents, together with the severity of the incident, may help ensure that this type of behavior stops. If you're being bullied for any of those reasons, any of those factors. And there's help via that avenue as well. And one good place that carries real weight and seems to strike fear in most organizations and their HR managers is ACAS, the Advisory, Conciliation, and Arbitration Service, which provides a wealth of resources and tools and contacts to raise a complaint as part of a formal claim or request for tribunal. In terms of statistics here in the UK, 47% of UK workers have observed bullying at work, with 1 in 10 reporting experiences of being bullied in the workplace. So how does the UK view bullying? According to the Anti-Bullying Alliance in the UK, it's defined as the repetitive, intentional hurting of one person or group by another person or group, where the relationship involves an imbalance of power. It can happen face-to-face or online, unquote. This is usually with the intention of offending, intimidating, insulting, undermining, or humiliating others, resulting in harm. Okay, that seems very, very clear. So what are examples, signs of workplace bullying? What does this actually look like in action? Okay, so here are 10 scenarios that they recognize, importantly, that they recognize. So if they recognize these, then you should be able to do something about it. So number 1, unfair criticism. Number 2, receiving an unfair workload, including trivial or degrading tasks. Number 3, not receiving credit where it's due while another takes the glory for the work. Number 4, being unfairly held back from promotion and training opportunities. Number 5, being spoken to in an angry, aggressive, or rude manner, including using unsuitable language. Number 6, being subjected to personal insults and remarks. Number 7, cyberbullying. I think we all know what that means. It's got a long list of examples here, but I think we well know the definition of cyberbullying. It's unwanted comments, messages, and so forth. Number 8, spreading of unfounded rumors or lies. Number 9, being regularly undermined or belittled. Number 10, being excluded, intimidated, threatened, or assaulted. I just want to spend a moment to say 2 key things about this list. Number 1, if this happens once, that's not grounds for you to go and raise a case, right? Or to try and take this on somewhere. What you need here is really to demonstrate that it's happening as a cluster of events. So more than a couple of times this has occurred. Therefore, it is a pattern. Because sometimes you can get people on a really bad day and they may have, some character flaws where they, lash out, and they're, angry or rude, frankly. I seem to encounter a lot of rude people after COVID. But that doesn't make them a bully on the face of it if it happens once. It just means that they're a rude character. So if it happens 2 or 3 times or more, then you've got a pattern. I call these clusters. That's noteworthy, and you want to make note of that. And I recommend that you record events in like a diary, a notebook, which we'll talk about in the next episode. But the other thing I wanted to say about this list before we move on is The point about being regularly undermined or belittled is really key here, because I have seen firsthand people being talked down to. And I want to make it absolutely clear that no hierarchy anywhere in the world makes that excusable. And I see it a lot, where people that are in more junior positions accept being talked down to or spoken to in a condescending way, or their work is belittled in front of others. And it's excused somehow because they're the employee. And this type of belittling is occurring from their manager or their supervisor. And that is just not acceptable. You are not beholding to your manager to the degree that your work should be so undermined and you should be spoken to in that way. You are not their possession. You are not there to be kicked and beaten down, right? I just really want that to be clear to all of you, because I do see that happening, and it isn't right. So make sure that you understand that having your work put down or being spoken to in a demeaning way or belittling way is never acceptable. And finally, what are the effects of being bullied? How might this manifest itself for you, or possibly your coworker, or possibly for a whole group of people, which I've seen firsthand in organizations where you have institutionalized bullying. So this is a list of what it would look or feel like if you are suffering the effects of bullying. Signs of being depressed or outright miserable at work. You may display loss of confidence, be demotivated with feelings of helplessness. You may show symptoms of illness. You may be stressed or anxious, and you may even be afraid of going to work. And you may have the need to take time off work. And then what are the effects on the organization itself? It can be devastating to a business when you have bullying in the workplace. It can result in a hit to morale and lost profits in the form of diminished productivity, increased absenteeism, higher turnover rate, and potential legal liabilities for organizations. It's this combination of personal and organizational impact that makes confronting workplace bullying a crucial endeavor, and yet it thrives in the workplace. So let's go on to part 2 to check out why. Okay, so part 2, how bullying is allowed to thrive in big business. In June 2022, Forbes posted a brilliant, if not stinging article sharing how employers are empowering bullying in the workplace. That's a title you do not want. Having been a victim of and witness to institutionalized bullying in 2 former roles, this article really stood out to me. Again, the links are in the show notes, and I really invite you to read the Forbes article by Heidi Kurter. Here's a summary with my own additions. Okay, so ways in which an employer empowers bullying. Number 1, by prioritizing company outcomes over people. Given the shockingly high percentage of bullying cases by superiors, this one is the most tragic enablers. As Kurter writes, if the bully is a high-performing employee, companies are more inclined to overlook their behaviors in favor of their results. Heather Welch, resource manager at Ukulele Tabs, explained, if the alleged bully performs exceptionally at work, then the company does almost nothing to prevent it. Rather, they leave it to the victim and the bully to make amends and work things out themselves in the guise of prioritizing culture. This leads to virtually no change in behaviors. Okay, number 2, failing to take the complaint seriously. This usually takes the form of victim blaming or forcing the victim to defend or prove their position, leading them to feel intimidated, devalued, and worse, leading them to eventually quit. Again, given the high proportion of cases by superiors, it's difficult to imagine anything scarier than raising a case against your boss, and then to see nothing done about it, for the response to be drawn out, And for the person to remain in post undermines everything for that employee. I once raised a complaint against a client's staff member for bullying and misogynistic behavior. In fact, it was raised to 3 different managers over a 2-month period, and they did, well, nothing. Literally nothing, which I found astonishing. They said, oh, that's just John. I'll use the name John. And that I shouldn't take it personally, basically gaslighting me. So I made a point of recording everything and sharing a memorialized version. When I say recording, I mean in a notebook, and sharing a memorialized version of the incidents with the head of the department so that if another case came up after I'd moved on, they'd at least have a documented history of it. This is a really important point, which I'll visit again in the second episode. But one of the things you need to keep in mind when determining which method you're going to apply in dealing with a bully is assessing what is the value of the relationship to you. If the value is short-term and transactional, I think you should act with vigor and use all formal resources at your disposal. If it's an ongoing relationship and there are dynamics at play that shed light to why this behavior could be happening, and we're going to talk a little bit about that in a moment, then this is not transactional. This is an actual relationship, and you need to consider that duration of relationship and the value of the relationship to you in your role over the long term. So those 2 types of relationships will have an absolute bearing on the path you decide to choose. So we'll talk about that a little bit more. Okay, and on to enabler number 3, giving bullies a slap on the wrist. This is really about the employer being incompetent, inconsistent, or ill-prepared, really, in how to deal with a bullying scenario, especially when it's a member of management. All of this results in delay, added exposure for the person who was bullied, and a diluted, watered-down approach to investigating and applying corrective actions. And finally, number 4, whitewashing employee protections. By this, I mean an organization who throws up policies, employee training, whistleblowing instructions, maybe even some posters, which I think is the worst. But they may even have posters around about equal and respectful treatment of others, but sadly with zero follow-through and zero self-awareness or intention of actually going the distance to enforce their policies, or worse, showing favoritism and applying the corrective actions at their leisure. This is, again, usually when the bully turns out to be a member of senior management, okay? So we've looked at ways in which employers enable bullying behavior. I've given you a sampling there. It's not exhaustive, but I think it's a really well-rounded list, and I think some of us will have had experience of that firsthand. Now, for balance, it's important to know that some companies are honest, fair-minded employers and will absolutely stand by their policies. But just be aware that if you work in an organization that demonstrates some of the characteristics I've mentioned, you may be in for some rough waters, as even if you're not bullied directly, the statistics are just as high for those affected by witnessing pervasive bullying in the workplace. It has the same corrosive effect on self-esteem and team morale. And it's critical that you know this institutionalized behavior is wrong. And while I'm going to provide you with guidance on how to negotiate with a bully in my next episode, so part 2 of this 2-part series, that is not guidance on how to negotiate with a bullying organization. Because the sad reality is you simply can't negotiate with a broken organization like that. You just will not come out on top. It's like trying to move a mountain with a soup spoon. You can, of course, raise a claim, and that is the advice that I would give you if you're working in an organization with institutionalized bullying. I would say your best path is to consider raising a claim and put some things in place to protect yourself after the fact, like settlements. But you won't be able to change the mindset of a whole organization or whole leadership team that believes bullying is an acceptable form of leadership, or where they have an ambivalent perspective on it. It's just not an acceptable way to lead a company, and it's a sign of weakness. Remember what I said earlier? Bullying is the lowest form of negotiation because brute strength requires no skill. So yeah, the same applies here. So on that point, we're on to part 3, the psychology of the bully, why they are what they are. I've written about this a lot on my blogs, and I cover it in my courses. To answer that question, we must first understand where fear comes from, specifically the bully's fear. The triangulation of fear, loss, and the absence of safety creates the trauma responses in a person to fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. The first three responses most people have heard of. The last response, fawn, means to be so fearful as to placate the aggressor and agree or become complicit to the situation in front of them, sometimes even adopting the aggressor's own traits so they themselves become a bully. This is again something you see emerge in companies with institutionalized bullying. I have seen it firsthand where you can have whole departments that have adopted that behavior where the head of the department is really acting without consequence as a bully. So please keep that in mind. This whole topic, the response to fear, loss, and how it creates the absence of safety, is a big, chunky topic. And you can read about it on blogs or in my Negotiation Essentials course. So I'll try to be succinct here. It's important to know that understanding this part is vital in being able to negotiate with a bully. And so I'll refer to this again in part 2 of this 2-part series. So firstly, a human's response to fear is primal. It's part of our neuroprocessing, and our bodies are hardwired to respond to fear in a way so as to survive the attack, whether it's perceived or real, whether it's from a saber-toothed tiger or a bully at work. Our brain doesn't distinguish the threat as any less real. And it takes over the part of our neural network that deals with reasoned logic and logical thought, I should say, in order to prioritize survival. Most times this is the amygdala kicking in and sending signals to the brain to increase blood flow to our limbs, slow our metabolism, dull our hearing and memory, all temporarily, of course, but just long enough for us to, grab that sword, because, we've got the saber-toothed tiger chasing us, or to run for the hills, with fight or flight being the most common. Now, this reaction, as I mentioned, is hardwired. It's just how our physiology works. You can, of course, train yourself to try to react differently, just as you can train a dog to react differently to stress. But that training is for the trigger, not the response. The response is hardwired. It's nearly impossible to change that in the human body. You'll never be able to effectively change the response to fear in that individual with lasting results. But you can change how you respond to the trigger, right? These are 2 different things. We have the response to fear and then the trigger of the fear. What do I mean? Okay, so let's use this example of a former street dog who has been rescued and rehabilitated, but has a deeply entrenched fear of loud noises and especially motorcycles. The motorcycle is the trigger. And as this dog has a violent reaction to motorcycles and will bark aggressively and will chase the motorcycle down. Now, some other dogs have a flee response to motorcycles where they will run or try to hide in any small space they can find. They're just terrified. But in terms of this particular rescue dog, the fear response, meaning his fight response, won't change. But the trigger can be addressed so that he reacts differently the next time a motorcycle goes past. We call this below and above threshold training. So it's below and above threshold training and rewards, and I'll talk more about that in the next episode. And so aggression is a response to fear, and this is done to show power, dominance, and control over the other, just as you would see between two lions fighting over the dominance of a pride, for example. And so then in modern living, what could cause a businessman or woman to feel such fear in the workplace is to become aggressive, expressing the fight response, like the dog trying to chase down and dominate the motorcycle. Well, this is where loss comes in, the second part of the triangle. For this, we must reacquaint ourselves with the concept that people operate under existential givens. Famous existential psychotherapist Irvin Yalom described these as being concerned with a person's interaction with death, freedom, isolation, and meaninglessness, and that an existential crisis could present itself when a person's interaction with these categories was done outside of their control, such as a life event that negatively affects a person's sense of dignity or their self-worth. Something like a divorce or a demotion or experiencing the sudden death of a close family member, or even your adult children going off to college can introduce these deep feelings of loss and lack of control. All of these events will remind the person that their existence happens without control over these matters. And everyone will respond differently to these types of existential events, but loss in particular is a hugely powerful emotion, and it can produce equally powerful responses like fear, anger, and depression. And what makes these feelings better or worse for someone is how bountiful or lacking their overall needs are. What do I mean? Well, to break it down, we must recall Maslow's hierarchy of needs. In his published paper, A Theory of Human Motivation, Maslow first theorized the concept that a person's path to happiness and fulfillment is structured on a hierarchy where people are motivated instinctively to fulfill basic needs before moving on to more advanced needs. His theory asserts that people have an inborn desire to achieve self-actualization, i.e., to have full independent control and determination over their lives. This is the ultimate goal, and once achieved, will allow for a more enlightened view of life and society. To achieve this, one had to firstly meet other basic, more primitive physical needs and work up in sequence from there. Largely based on needs similar to instincts, Maslow believed these inborn aspirations followed a natural path rising in graduated value, including the need for things like food, safety, love, and self-esteem. Specifically, these 5 developmental stages in order include stage number 1, physiological needs. This is the need for air, water, food, and shelter. Stage 2, safety needs. This is the pursuit of employment, health, financial resources, and a safe home. So not just any shelter, but an actual home. Stage 3, love and belonging. This is the fulfillment of key relationships with family and friends and having a sense of being connected to others. Stage 4, esteem. This is the elevated feeling of respect and self-esteem that comes from status or accomplishments and is usually paired with higher levels of freedom or attainment. And then stage 5, self-actualization. This is operating at the highest level. This is an enlightened sense of self-actualization and self-worth. So most grown adults operating in a professional capacity are most likely operating at stage 3 to stage 4, between the love and belonging and the esteem levels, right? Yes, that's a reasonable assumption because we've secured housing, some level of fitness and physical health, some financial security, hopefully, and a loving relationship with someone or maybe even a family. Securing those things and relationships comfortably puts a grown adult in, stage 3, if not stage 4, if they're perhaps operating in a management or leadership level, where they've got some control and influence on others beyond themselves. It's important to note that few people ever get to stage 5, or at least not until they're much older and have had the benefit of a lot of resources at their disposal and have truly transcended their societal boundaries to touch and improve the lives of many others outside of their sphere. People that come to mind immediately include people like Gandhi, Eleanor Roosevelt, Susan B. Anthony, Bill Gates, Tony Robbins. These are individuals that have had profound and widespread positive impact on whole communities, even countries. And of course, there will be other remarkable people out there. Now, back to our scenario. Imagine a manager that recently went through a divorce, has reduced custody of his child, perhaps sees his daughter only on weekends, lost his house and half his life savings in the settlement, and is paying off, let's say, $20,000 in legal fees. What stage is he operating at? What stage is he back down at? Because I think it's fair to consider that he may have been operating at stage 4. But yeah, I think it's safe to say that given all of this loss and change of circumstance and change of control, he's probably functioning between stage 2 and 3. And what's the primary emotion he's likely feeling? Loss. That's right. Followed by what? Fear. And we know that the defensive emotion to fear is what? Anger. Absolutely. These are everyday people carrying all kinds of loss, grief, fear. It doesn't take much for an existential event to pull the rug out from our protective bubbles we imagine for ourselves. And they're sitting across the table from you, trying to negotiate, and they've got depleted reserves in the tank. And remember, a person can't hold an enlightened view of their lives or navigate something that requires an elevated perspective on a difficult topic if they're stuck trying to secure basic feelings of physical or financial safety. And so where does this leave Archie Bunker? It's complicated is the short answer. Growing up, All in the Family played weekly in my house. My parents absolutely loved that show. I was too young to understand the humor or the stinging social and political jabs when it was first airing. It was only in later reruns as a preteen that I started to understand the pointed dialogue of how this show worked and that it wasn't just about this old offensive bigot. To be honest, I think I was afraid of the character of Archie Bunker. I just found him really unpleasant and intimidating. I couldn't understand the appeal of watching this when there were way better shows on, like, Wonder Woman, The Bionic Woman. I mean, come on. I'm probably dating myself here, but Anyway, I found him mean, angry, and intimidating. But was that all he was? As part of the 50th anniversary edition, Claudia Luther of the LA Times wrote, "As fans of All in the Family observed week after week, Archie's fruitless attempts to get his wife to stifle herself and his many labels for women's libers, people of color, and homosexuals only accentuated his powerlessness in a world that no longer acknowledged guys like him as kings of the hill." What was happening? Archie's world and sense of self were diminishing. And it was his total fear of change and really the existential loss of control that perpetuated those feelings of loss, and then defensively, anger. And so despite his terrible temper and juvenile name-calling, I do remember a couple of really touching episodes where Archie was different. He was vulnerable. There was one episode where Gloria, Archie's daughter, has a miscarriage, and another episode where Edith is showing signs of illness to a seemingly ambivalent Archie, only to pass away in her sleep from a stroke. It wasn't enough that Edith Bunker's endearing character had died on screen, but it was that it devastated him, Archie Bunker, that we all wept when we watched that episode. So hold on to that image and we'll pick up in the next episode the 3 methods for negotiating with a bully, and we'll break it all down. Until then, have a great week, and we'll see you soon. If you like my show and want to hear more of these topics, please give me a like and follow us. Go to kellyconfidential.com and subscribe to our newsletter.